For TRICHOMES.com, I'm Jesse Batend, and this is The High Ground. On this show, we feature leaders of the cannabis industry. We talk to everyone from farmers to CEOs and public officials, anyone making an impact on the cannabis community and beyond. Living in quarantine is impacting just about every aspect of our daily lives. Beyond messing with our routines when it comes to work and family, people are reporting having trouble sleeping and even having really vivid and intense dreams when they finally do fall asleep. Well, my next guest today has some advice for just about all of that. I'm joined today by the incredibly prolific Dr. Mary Clifton. Dr. Clifton is an internal medicine doctor with over 20 years of experience. She is also licensed to provide medical cannabis recommendations in New York. Dr. Mary is a recognized expert in cannabinoid therapeutics. She's a published researcher, a national speaker on women's health, a best-selling author, and she's a leading voice in telemedicine. Dr. Clifton, thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
The first thing I kind of wanted to ask you was, before all of this happened and we began sheltering and quarantining and staying at home, how aware were you of what was coming, and how did you prepare to sort of meet the moment personally for your own family and your own well-being, but also professionally?
Well, that's interesting, because I think that a lot of people, really feel like, for example, when Dr. Fossey says that we knew something like this was coming, everybody thinks that's such a bizarre statement. But actually, I've always been very interested in emerging pathogens. There's an emerging pathogens section of the CDC website. And so I think it's sort of like the crazy doctor version of a thriller movie, like a scary movie. So my whole life, my whole life as a physician, which has basically been my whole life, over 20 years, I've been going to the emergent pathogen page and then making it difficult for me to fall asleep at night, because they'll say, boy, if this bug figures out how to cross over into humans and transmit more readily, we're going to have a problem. Or if this bug, figures out more of an aerosolization route of transmission, and you'd be like, oh boy, So actually this kind of thing has been running through my mind for a long time, along with a lot of other doctors too. It's probably the most fascinating portion of infectious disease. But I started to see it in November, just like everybody did, little snippets, little messages, and then I couldn't figure out why I was supposed to get excited. And then December rolled around, and I was still saying that I couldn't really tell what exactly was going on here. And then once January hit, it became obvious that we were going to get into some serious trouble. At that point, I was you started to think about yourself and your children. I have 2 grown children, and I tried to advise them. I tried to just think about the ways that we could reduce an infectious spread. And then my own life, interestingly, kind of took an odd turn. I was coming to visit my mother in Michigan from New York City, and just to spend a couple of weeks hanging out with her, because nobody's getting any younger. And she ended up having a stroke like 2 days before I arrived. And and then I came home early, and then I've been here ever since, sort of running an assisted living facility for one, if you will.
Wow.
And it's working out okay, because I'm keeping mother safe, and I'm also quarantined in place here. So that's So I feel almost like there was some divine intervention that led to all of this. Because even when I was flying back to Michigan for mother, people were masking up on the plane and using, disinfectants on their seat, and just and I was seeing how a new normal was on its way, way back then. And that was, in February, I guess.
That's so interesting. I mean, first of all, I picture you kind of like after dinner, kicking up your feet in front of the computer, like with a cup of tea or something, just like checking out the CDC website, which is a fascinating way to freak yourself out. But also, it sounds like you're seeing the reality of this thing from every side, the personal as a patient, with your mom dealing with a health condition in addition to what the hospitals and the medical system is dealing with this
Yes.
outbreak. And I can share I personally, my father actually had a minor stroke a few weeks ago.
Oh,
So
no.
I've literally gone through the exact same thing. And it makes it feel real in a way that is perhaps unachievable, without, having the reality of someone you care about in the hospital and not being allowed to go visit them because, you could spread or contract this disease. Like
Mm-hmm.
we, the closeness that we do have is so important right now. And
Oh, it definitely is. And it's certainly brought that into focus. Like what really matters here is it is all of these relationships. I feel lucky that I do have an interest in emerging pathogens and that I was sort of semi following this. I think I realized the severity of it earlier than a lot of people in our country. And then I also, had some time to grieve the loss of the way that we used to be able to live and the way that I used to be able to travel to go see my grandkids and things. And now I'm really mobilized to try to help people, adopt a new normal as quickly as possible. The using appropriate facial coverings and taking appropriate precautions with cleaning and taking your vitamins, all the things that we need everybody to do so that we can get through this with the least amount of damage possible. Because all of these individuals that we're losing are somebody's dad and somebody's brother and somebody's uncle and somebody's son, and there's going to be a collective grief that's going to be very difficult on our country if we don't approach this and take it on head on.
Yeah. And I do really want to talk to you about that new normal and the ways that people can start working to adjust. But for people who, and I know this information is out there and you've talked about it till you're blue in the face, but as we start to open back up again and perhaps see small groups of people coming together, firstly, I'm seeing more and more people, unfortunately, walking around and even going into stores without masks. For those that don't quite understand, it's correct to say that the mask is not just about protecting yourself, but it's about protecting the spread of the disease to other people. Correct?
Well, the if you the very best thing you can do. I mean, I don't think that people realize much how much respiratory aerosolization you do when you just talk. You remember when we were kids, they would say it, don't spray it, and my girls always give me a hard time if there's ever any evidence of any type of respiratory aerosolization, if I'm eating food perhaps, and I talk with my mouth full, but it's surprising how much respiratory aerosolization you do just, ordinarily. You make these aerosols and you also make these droplets, and the droplets are heavy and they fall directly to the ground. And then the aerosols, linger in the air for several minutes. So, and if you cough or sneeze, you're distributing a significant amount of aerosol at a high velocity. So it can distribute through a room in the matter of 2 or 3 minutes with the amount of velocity behind it. So you just never know if you keep your distance from somebody who's coughing if you haven't just walked into somebody else's cough cloud. So there's a surprising amount of protection with facial coverings. I mean, once you leave home, your safest thing to do is to stay home. But when you get out into a community environment, the risk of spread is real. So using a face mask is going to protect you from breathing in somebody else's aerosols, but it also protects somebody from you, just in case you're infected and in the asymptomatic phase. Because you've got an average of 5 days, but it can take up to 14 days for this bug to make you aware that you're sick with it, and during that whole incubation period, you can spread this contagion and make other people sick. And there's certainly some terrible case reports in the literature of somebody who didn't realize they were sick and they went to a family birthday party, gave everybody hugs, got everybody sick, somebody dies. Like, it's just some horrible outcomes that people are having to live with, that it was their fault that all that happened. So it's important to protect yourself and to protect others. Absolutely.
Just jumping on that, I mean, I am not by any means asking you to give medical advice here or, tell people exactly how they should act. But, I'm here in Chicago, and one of our governor has kind of released a 4-stage recovery plan, and different states have different plans. But the next step in that recovery, groups of 10 and under would be safe to gather in some capacity. I guess what I'm wondering is, once we kind of have that go ahead, how do we modulate our behavior with our loved ones? Like, will it be safe to hug our loved ones if we've been quarantining from them, or is it going to be a matter of kind of having to balance safety with closeness?
Yeah, that's such a complex question, because it is going to be, a while here before things feel really safe. It's going to change our behaviors for a long time. And there's certain of my family members that I would be really comfortable seeing, and other ones that that I know are not maintaining a tight quarantine and that won't take this seriously. And so, there's going to be a lot of limitations applied to what you're able to do. And you hate to have a 5-minute discussion of, how have you been maintaining your quarantine? Have you been masking? Do you use, are you taking appropriate hand washing techniques into account? But with all of that said, there are a few people. I have a girlfriend who's a dentist that I love, and she's has a husband with Lou Gehrig's disease. She's maintaining an exquisitely tight quarantine. Now, that is somebody I would go see. But then, I have another close family member that still goes to Home Depot. He's, refusing to wear a mask. He's wandering around and just won't do curbside. That's a person who I really can't, be in close contact with until at this point, we just don't have enough testing to know where the hot spots are, and we don't have reliable, to some degree, reliable reporting. So we're just going to have a lot more answered questions than unanswered questions before we can move back to a new normal. So I'm very much an extrovert, though, and this whole not going out and not having meals with people and not having social experiences is not fun for me. It's a real challenge, but it's okay. It's all something that we all have to figure out while we get through this.
Yeah. I think going into it, I personally, I can't speak for other folks, but I had a sense, this was going to be difficult in ways that were hard to calculate. Like, you had this sense at the beginning, like, I can't go an entire month without seeing my friends and family. Like, that sounds crazy. And then you're a month and a half in, and some things are easier than anticipated, and other things are so much stranger than you thought they would feel. The way that certain days kind of blend together and routines are changing. And I guess I have some questions that kind of blend into your work with cannabis and CBD and your research there. But I'm curious, beyond that world as well, if you have advice for people. One of the big things that we're hearing is people are having trouble with sleep, intense or strange dreams. Can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe what you might recommend people do to help work with getting some sort of a regular sleep pattern back?
Well, There is a lot of problems with sleep, and what I'm hearing from patients and from, more formal medical reports is that people are having, dreams about biting or insects all over them, or,
Hmm.
worms, like some death dreams. So people are very anxious around a lot of that. And of course, those very scary dreams are hard to fall back asleep after you've been woken up from a nightmare like that. There's some of this processing looks a lot like post-traumatic stress disorder, where intrusive
Hmm.
thoughts are happening as nightmares. But I don't think any of us are in PTSD yet. I think we're actively processing a trauma. And some of us will process it primarily with anger and lashing out and defiance and contrariness. And some of us are, will be able to, move into a realm of just trying to do our best. And there's going to be a lot of different ways that people process it. But I think that this is a great opportunity for people who are dealing with anxiety or difficulty sleeping to give CBD a try and see if that's going to help with those types of concerns. The CBD itself is particularly sedating and has great research around insomnia and nightmares. My favorite study is actually a Canadian study of PTSD sufferers that had dealt with PTSD for years, and the population on average was only about 100 people. I think it was a small study, but a well done study, and these people were sleeping 5 hours a night on average and having
Hmm.
intrusive nightmares that were disrupting their sleep 5 nights a week. So
Wow.
you can imagine they were just disabled with their sleep. And they were started on a cannabinoid formulation and then were able to increase their sleep to 7 hours per night and decrease the nightmare frequency down to one a week. So
Wow.
you can imagine that that just created a different life for that population. But certainly for the rest of us who are having a hard time with falling asleep and staying asleep right now, having some intrusive nightmares, it would be a godsend to get that under control in a way that didn't leave us all zonked out and fatigued the whole next day.
It's interesting because I mean it's anecdotal, but I personally have had a couple of really intense ones, and one of
Mm.
them was like it was like I got shot in the stomach and I felt it. You know what I mean? Like
Oh,
it was so intense, and I haven't had dreams that intense since like midterms and stuff in college or like exams in college.
oh, wow.
It's the last time I remember like waking up with just like sweats and shocked from sleep. So that's really interesting. Your website has a great series on CBD and sleep, so I'm not asking you to
Yeah.
do the whole thing again. People should definitely check that out. But what are some of the things what does CBD do to you that makes it helpful with sleep?
Well, I don't think that we have excellent studies yet to know exactly how it works with different brain waves and different brain patterns. We do have some preliminary data that just suggests that it helps to restore balance and homeostasis to usual sleep patterns. So it isn't a sedative in the way of, that it just conks you out and you wake up 8 hours later with no recollection of having fallen asleep. It puts you into a healthy sleep pattern more quickly and more deeply. So the sleep pattern mirrors a normal, healthy pattern.
And for someone who's interested in trying CBD, you offer consultations through telemedicine and other technological options. But what are the benefits of reaching out to a doctor and doing a consultation rather than just sort of like picking a product and just going it alone?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing telemedicine as my mechanism of doing medicine now for 5 years, and it helps to talk to a doctor who specializes in CBD and cannabis before you make your selection. But the reality is, as long as you find a product that is high quality and that is, and that's not really that difficult to do on your own. You can probably at least get some initial titration going, modify the administrative amount, see how it makes you feel. And then you can reach out if you're not getting the results that you were looking for something that's a little bit more personalized or dialed in for you. But I designed my site so that you should be able to pop onto the site and spend an hour or two and really get most of the questions answered that you need in order to make a selection to start on CBD or cannabis. And then if you want to take a deep dive, you can always really enjoy yourself and spend a whole bunch of time just listening to videos and having fun and learning everything you can. And we've got, of course, more videos coming. I shot a series of 40 strain videos that are going to be a lot of fun to share with everyone. There's a whole bunch of pandemic videos on how to manage isolation and anxiety that we're going to be sharing as we go. So I have a
Oh, that's
lot of
great.
content coming too.
That's wonderful. And I can say the site is fantastic, and
Thank you.
it's very, very helpful that it's broken down, by sort of effect or intent. I'm curious, one thing that I heard a lot, I do other podcasts besides this one, and even shows that were focused on, very specific topics, kind of expanded a little bit to include conversations about how people are dealing with the quarantine and sheltering in place, and really like a focus on mental health and wellness, like how you doing, hang in there kind of stuff. And one thing I heard a lot when people would talk about what they're doing to kind of keep their hopes up or keep their mood up is sort of, virtual happy hours or other events that kind of involved the consumption of alcohol, possibly the consumption of cannabis. I'm curious, is that something that concerns you in general? And if people feel like their routines have broken down and maybe they're consuming too much, they're having trouble kind of like keeping things in order, any advice for people about how to think about that as we all find ourselves with a lot less to do, perhaps?
Well, I feel like cannabinoid. I feel like a lot. I feel this way. A lot of people need to have more processing right now. There's a lot to process right now,
Hmm.
and a lot to accept and integrate into your life, and it's very difficult to do. And it's. I mean, I've been wearing a mask on and off for 20 years, and being asked to wear a mask now is still difficult for me. I mean,
Hmm.
it's hard to maintain a sterile environment of any way or keep your hands clean when you're out. All of these things are a really big ask for a lot of people, and people have a lot of processing to do, and in the absence of having an army of free therapists available, a lot of us are calling our moms or our sisters or our
Hmm.
friends and having a
Yeah.
bottle of wine together. And I think that cannabis is probably superior to wine because I think it enhances the processing. There's a study in the PTSD literature about using cannabis before your therapy sessions to try to do the therapy that extinguishes triggers, where you try to
Hmm.
bring up spiders and talk about spiders when spiders throw your PTSD, into high gear, which is, I mean, obviously a very simplified comment about it, but it was actually the first study of its kind to ever show that pre-treatment before therapy was beneficial at making therapy work better. And they've tried doing it with steroids, thinking that people who were chronically steroid suppressed might need some steroids before therapy, and that really didn't help. So this is really the first time that a medicine has potentially proven beneficial. So I think a happy hour laced with CBD, if you're in my shoes and you can't use cannabis, or with cannabinoid formulations, if you're able to consume those, I think that's a great idea right now. There's probably a good idea, if you don't want to do that, to having a glass of wine or two. I think a lot of the blue zones around the world where people live longer, more productive lives, they tend to use substances that help them to relax. Like the Mediterranean diet, they drink all that red wine when they're hanging out together. And then you can really get to the bottom of the problem instead of being focused on superficial things. You can forget about the fact that your hair didn't turn out, or that, your friend makes more money than you, or that, you're not smart enough to be in this crowd, or whatever. You have a couple glasses of wine and you're like, I'm beautiful and funny. And that's the way we should all feel, just really relaxed and successful and funny and pretty. And then you can relax and release a ton of serotonin and dopamine, and that'll extend your life. I'm all for some controlled substance use. When things get out of control and we have a problem, then we're in a different place. And then we need to bring in, Yasmin Hurd and start to talk about her work at Mount Sinai with addiction and how to treat it with CBD. But but by and large, a couple glasses of wine at night during this pandemic is probably helpful rather than hurtful,
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Hmm.
I've heard there was a conversation that I heard recently, or had the pleasure of taking part in, with a doctor who works with happiness. She studies the science of happiness, and she said that a lot of her patients and people that she works with have come to her with complaints of extreme guilt, that they feel bad about feeling happy, or they feel bad about feeling healthy or employed or okay, or whatever it be. And this is echoed through a lot of folks. And her response is that we actually sort of have a responsibility, that self-care and trying to take care of ourselves and achieve whatever form of happiness we can right now is beyond a personal goal. It's something that we kind of have a responsibility to do for each other, because happiness is contagious, because the way that we're feeling can affect the others around us. Is that something that you think about at all? And have you encountered feelings of guilt about not feeling the ramifications of this pandemic perhaps as strongly as others?
Oh, I think that I went through a horrible stage of panic and stress and anxiety around this, but I think I did it well ahead of everybody else, for all the reasons that we talked about. So I really put my family through a lot of suffering. I mean, very early in this course, I went to the mail. Mom was like, "Get the mail." So I was like, "Sure." So I went to the end of the driveway, and then I was like, "Okay, now wait a minute. How does one get the mail?" Because if I get the mail, then I have to touch the mailbox. I have to touch the mail. The mail's been touched, and the duration of time that the virus lives on plastic is really impressive. And the mailbox is plastic. So I was moving myself through a whole. Anyway, I came back in the house and said, "I'm having a full on panic attack now that I went and got the mail. So wow. I'm just gonna go and freak out upstairs for a little while, and then." Come back down when I'm more on track. So I've had a terrible time with this, but now that I'm through it, I feel like for people who have been able to get beyond that initial phase of however it manifested in you, if it's anger or if it's denial or if it's, anxiety or depression, if you can move past it, I think we are really obliged to help everybody else, try to, forward the debate on what we all have to do and how we're all going to do it. Because what we all have to do is pretty clear. The cleanliness that we're all going to have to do, the face coverings, the staying at home is straightforward. But we have to figure out how to not be contrary. And that groupthink is something that we all have to figure out how to comply with. So
Hmm.
I'm trying very hard to be a part of that conversation, to just help people as much as I can, do their best with complying with these recommendations so that we can reduce the mortality as much as possible. And I think it's the sooner that everybody embraces safety and really makes safety number one, the quicker we can return to some semblance of normal, the quicker we can reopen. But if you reopen and none of your employees are wearing masks and you're not conspicuously cleaning and you're just back to business as usual, and you become the next place of a super spreader, where all kinds of new cases were identified from one of your unmasked employees, that's going to be too bad for your business.
Yeah.
Yeah, not and too bad for the whole pandemic problem and the mortality that will ensue. So everybody's got to really embrace safety as number one. We all just have to agree that our health and our economic safety are our number one concerns now. And then how do we protect those?
Transitioning just a little bit from the current moment, and I'm sure we'll circle back there again, but I heard you talk on another podcast about I guess what I'm interested in. You were talking about a study out of the UK that was studying potentially the use of cannabis and IQ reduction or lower IQ in people
Yeah.
that used it. And what was really, really interesting to me was the point that you made about the lag, like the delay in time between where this data comes from these population studies, how long it takes to accumulate, and how we now have new information from a U.S. study that looked at twins. I'm curious if you can kind of just explain that for people.
Oh, sure. Because I think a lot of people think that if you use cannabis, you're going to become a stoner and you're going to, lose, and
Yeah,
you're going to,
absolutely.
and it's going to, you're going to get burned out. Your brain is going to be destroyed, and that study that was initially supported by that UK data analysis where they do these population based studies, and we do these all over the world. We have several of these ongoing in the U.S. where people agree to sign up for a study where they get followed over the next, 20 or 30 or 40 years. And we check in on them regularly and see how they do. And different lifestyle recommendations that we make all come from those studies. Like it appears that if you sleep well, or if you eat well, or if you, are in a different socioeconomic status, you're going to have different outcomes. And most of that is based on these population-based data studies where we look at 30,000 people over 20 years. And it was one of those studies where in the UK, where they initially suggested that you could see a 6-point reduction in IQ for people who regularly used cannabis as young adults and into their adulthood. And but then subsequently, studies out of New Zealand actually disproved that and said that there's no difference in IQ in people who are using cannabis or not. And then another study out of the United States, which had dysynchronous twin pairs, where one twin was using and the other twin wasn't. They were able to show no difference in IQ. And those dysynchronous twin pairs are very powerful pieces of data because you assume that the twins have had a fairly similar upbringing and fairly similar opportunities. And then also, that they have very similar DNA. So those are very powerful data points, and quite reassuring around IQ. There are certainly people who have changes to their short-term memory with using cannabinoid formulations regularly, and we used to have to say that it would take 3 months. Some early data again said it takes 3 months from stopping cannabinoids to restoring short-term memory function. Then more recent studies said 3 weeks. Now the most recent data is saying that within 3 days, your short-term memory, unless you are a really heavy daily user, should be restored with cessation.
That
So
is, yeah. You literally stole the next question right out of my mouth because I was gonna ask about that. I found that absolutely fascinating because that's just all I heard my entire life was, if you smoke weed, you're going to forget everything. What was my next question? No.
Yeah, I know. And well, yeah, I mean, I obviously can't smoke as a doctor, but when I was little, when I was in high school, I smoked. I always joke that I smoked my body weight, but and I smoked a lot. But I had, in retrospect, a lot of anxiety that we really didn't understand how to treat back then, and I was handling anxiety with cannabis and having a little bit of paranoia that I was tripping off with that process. But anyway, yeah, I think my mother mourned the loss of my intelligence and the subsequent, how my life was just going to be led in a, in just all the negative outcomes I was going to get. She was 100% bought into everything that the drug war was telling everybody. Anyway, now not so much. She still tells me I'm going to go to jail for this work, but I tell her, what if I don't go to jail, Mom? What if I actually help people and they get better and they restore their health and they're not, under the tight grip of a pharmaceutical company anymore and they're spending less money? I mean, what if all that happens? And she said, you won't be able to enjoy any of that when you're in jail.
Oh my gosh. And now you guys are living together, right?
Yeah, she is just cracking me up. So I love her. She's great. But I told her if I would never use medical cannabis on her, she would never tolerate it. I won't even use CBD, but I offer it to her every now and then. And just, if you ever want to explore that, I'll help you with that because, she's not a young woman. It would probably help some of her symptoms, but
Yeah. Well, that's so interesting that there's this like resistance even within your own family. And I think that's a really great transition to ask you about your own story. What did your trajectory, in medicine look like? And when does cannabis kind of enter the picture for you?
Oh, well, I've been a doctor for 20 years and I've always been interested in what's new or what's interesting, particularly things that innovate toward patient empowerment. I love for patients to take charge of their own health and feel confident that they can manage their conditions with limited doctor input. So for 8 or 9 years, I worked in vegan diet and in dietary modification and lifestyle modification and wrote a book and a companion cookbook, and I created a coaching community and just never really got it off the ground. Vegan diet is a hard sell, and I didn't want to sell a pill or a potion, and which probably would have been an important thing to do, but I'm just not sure what their position really is in long-term weight loss. So, I was working on that and had 74 coaches around the country. And then about 5 years ago, I guess now, my older brother died. He spent 2 years fighting appendiceal cancer, just a rare form of very invasive colon cancer, and it did him in very quickly. And I managed his hospice at his bedside for the last several days of his life and could not get control of anything. I just couldn't get control of his anxiety or his pain or his nausea. I didn't have anything under control, even with all the best medicines. And he died in a very distressed state. And then literally just a few months after that, I had a girlfriend develop recurrent ovarian cancer, and I was again at the bedside, except this time with cannabis, with complete control of basically everything, basically all the time. And I thought, well, none of this is real. It's a one-up. It's unlikely that any of this is supported by science. I'll go back and do some research, and then I'll get back to work in my regular job. And well, that was 5 years ago. It's just, it's clear that there's a lot more research than I ever knew there was. And I don't think other doctors know how much research there is. And we have the potential to provide a really high level of care for our patients and give them a lot of relief for conditions that we don't do a very good job managing right now.
I'm curious what the reaction of your peers was like when you started to go down that path. Did you find others, kind of were they skeptical? Did they understand why you were going in that
Yeah.
direction?
Well, I mean, I've always run a private solo practice, and maybe
Mm.
that's allowed me to, have more fun in areas that are on roads less traveled because I haven't really had partners that have, reined me in for the sake of the partnership. I've just been able to do what interests me. So I took this on, and then, eventually scrapped my vegan diet program and worked with my team to try to figure out what this community really needs. And my team was super excited about going this direction. And we really felt that like in terms of a business manager and my marketing manager, and we thought that what we really need here is great education. We just need the cannabis and CBD community to have the research ready at their fingertips, because we can't expect every doctor to drop what they're doing and spend, hours researching the materials themselves. So that's what I started to do, was create these 3-minute videos that were really informational, chock full of information, beautifully produced and entertaining, at least intermittently, and
Mhm.
had a lot of fun pulling them together. And then once I had a decent understanding of what I was doing, I tried to get them in front of as many people as possible. So I'm really proud of the work that I've been able to accomplish with my team at CBD and CannabisInfo.com. And we're moving it into a 501 C3, or a nonprofit entity, and we can provide additional support for research and community for the people in cannabis and CBD.
When it comes to kind of debuting the new you for the first time, and sort of taking on this position as someone who was going to talk about what, at least to some, is still a controversial subject. I'm curious, like when you talk to people like me, or even, more traditional journalists, what are some of the, like, how have the reactions changed over time? Have you felt people be more open, or were people always curious?
That's a good question. I mean, I feel like there's pockets of curiosity and pockets that are still, really not ready to hear this message. And and there's so many reasons why that is. I think that we have been very effective in the drug war with making people scared of cannabis as a gateway drug, rather than thinking of it as your exit drug from so many pharmaceutical therapies that people are using. People are viewing it as a gateway drug to more significant drug use, like with cocaine or heroin, with drugs that have considerably more danger. And so it somehow got lumped in as that, even though there's never really been any proof that it functions as a gateway drug. But people are scared of cannabis, whether whether you think that's appropriate or not, and that crowd is persisting. And then there are other people who are very much ready to start using it. I'm always amazed when I'm at an event, even when I go out to dinner with a group of friends, but especially when I'm at a graduation party or a wedding, somebody always taps me on the shoulder and says, would you come and talk to Uncle Joe? He's been driving to Colorado twice a year to stock up on a bunch of cannabis, and then driving it across 3 state lines. And he, you're like, good Lord, don't tell me all of that. Let me go talk to Uncle Joe. And then, this person is just a human being. Like, you would have never guessed that he is is doing the type of activity he's doing. When he's not at this party, the people are in pain. They're in psychological pain with anxiety or PTSD that they haven't really ever been able to go through therapy with to manage, or it still persists after therapy. Or people have, restless legs or Parkinson's, and they've just found that this helps them, and then they're accessing it. So as long as I think somebody has an open mind and they don't mind that feeling, that lightheadedness, that buzzy feeling, or the slight dissociation that you might experience, there's a huge community of people that has the potential to benefit.
I understand that it's probably a bit of a sensitive subject, so I hope it's not much to ask. But I'm curious, in the context of hospice care for people, like especially in intense pain or in like an ending of life situation, do you kind of can you see the relief that it brings? Like what in
Oh,
terms of efficacy, like for someone who's never seen the difference that a patient getting a medicine that is helping them,
yeah.
I guess I just wonder what it's like.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. There's it sometimes has such a profound effect for people who are dealing with chronic pain or dealing with anxiety or sleep or some of the more esoteric medical problems, the muscle spasms with multiple sclerosis or other movement disorders. And I think that in a lot of cases, we really also dramatically underestimate the amount of anxiety and stress that people who are dealing with chronic disease are also dealing with. So, in some cases and in some studies, you don't necessarily find that the amount of tremor related to the Parkinson's decreases, but the Parkinson's patient says that they feel a lot better because the CBD manages the anxiety and also manages the sleep disorders associated with Parkinson's. So it is really lucky. And I've felt that way my whole life. I've been very lucky to be operating in a medical model, with limitless possibilities. We've always had so many great medical management opportunities available for people. And I've been able to help people get out of pain or get control of nerve damage pain, and feel a lot better and be more productive and be more engaged in their relationships and in their experiences with their family. So that's always been just a very powerful and beautiful thing for me to witness. I think what you're seeing now with people turning to CBD and cannabis are people that worry about the expense of their medications and their ongoing visits with their doctors and how costly those visits are, especially as people are losing their insurance en masse. And
Mhm.
then you've got long supply chains and it's difficult to get, there may be some problems with not getting your products, based on supply chain disruption if you've got international production facilities. And people want something that is safe and homegrown in the USA and is going to give them rapid relief of their symptoms. And cannabis really fits that bill. I mean, we're saying that this industry now is a $7 billion industry. It's not a teeny tiny industry, but it's a $53 billion industry if you look at all of the underground sales and combine those. I mean, the states that come forward with recreational use and the federal government, the sooner they can make it legal, the faster we'll be in recovery mode.
Well, let me ask you, what are you looking at in terms of the future of cannabis and CBD? Any studies that you're curious about? Anything that you personally are hoping to do in that front?
Oh, I'm excited to think about immune modulation, especially in the setting of viral infection. I've been reading and thinking and doing videos around that. And that's been interesting me, and also the economic side of it, the ability of people to try to use cannabis and CBD as their side hustle, as their gig that provides them with some financial stability in a very unstable time. I mean, I think a lot of people got a terrible lesson. All of us got a lesson in the last couple of months about how unstable and insecure things can sometimes be that we thought were very secure. And I've always focused hard on diversifying my income. I always feel more confident when I have a lot of sources of income rather than, one major source. And I think a lot of people are going to be embracing that in the future, just knowing that they can ramp up a side hustle if they need to. So trying to help identify places within this exploding cannabis economy where people can have a side hustle and bring their skills is something I'm interested in doing right now.
Dr. Mary Clifton is the best-selling author of The Grass is Greener, Medical Marijuana, THC and CBD Oil, Reversing Chronic Pain, Inflammation, and Disease, and Get Wasted, as well as 5 companion cookbooks. So that actually, I want to ask you one last question as folks are at home and we're seeing a lot of sourdough bread baking and people taking on other fun hobbies. Do you have a favorite recipe that you would recommend to anybody if they want to try something out?
Oh, that's funny that you would recommend, that you would ask for a favorite recipe. I think the funny thing is it's shaped like a big round pill, but I think the very best thing that you can take that will support your immune system and reduce your risk for cancer and help you have a super healthy gut is cabbage. I think everybody who's listening to this should eat an entire round of cabbage once a week. So,
wow.
Yeah, I think it's amazing for your body, just amazing for your body. So I'll eat, I cut up cabbage all the time and saute it with dinner, but a lot of times just eat it raw with your favorite salad dressing. And I mean, it's powerful. It's a bit medicinal in its flavor. It takes a little getting used to, but making a great coleslaw and allowing it to sit for a bit in your favorite coleslaw recipe is just it'll soften it up and it takes some of the bitterness out, and you can live forever eating cabbage.
That's amazing advice. I'm glad I asked. Dr. Clifton is also the mastermind behind CBD and CannabisInfo.com. Definitely recommend that for anybody who's curious about starting to learn more about CBD. Dr. Clifton, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You can find more cannabis industry reporting at TRICHOMES.com, as well as more great shows like this one. If you're a member of the cannabis community and you have a story you want to share with us, reach out. You can reach the show at highground at TRICHOMES.com. Please take a second to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. It really helps others find the show. And you can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at TRICHOMES.com and following us on all social media. The High Ground is produced by David Fortin. I'm Jesse Batend, and thank you for listening.